Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the much anticipated AMD Fury X. Now, Fury X, there are going to be a lot of you that are confused right now, so I'm going to try and get a lot of things cleared up right at the very beginning. People did think initially that the 390X was going to be this card. And still today on Facebook, I'm still seeing people confused about the difference between the 390X, and the Fury X. So the 390X isn't the top end card anymore. What AMD have done is they've introduced this new Fury branding, and that's where the new cards are coming in with the HBM, the high bandwidth memory. This is something we'll talk about in a minute. And essentially the Fury X is like their version of the Titan X. I'm pretty sure that's where the X is coming from anyway. So it's their kind of flagship product. It's the top of their range. And it also means, like the Titan X, that it's a reference board only. And that means the card that I'll show you in the pictures and stuff in shortly, that's how it's going to be. The vendors are not allowed to change the cooler or anything, so it's just going to be like a rebadge job. So if you want an MSI or an Asus version, then you'll pretty much get exactly the same card with just different stickers on it and comes in a different box. That's not a new thing, so before the fanboys start rioting and chucking their toys out of the pram, it really isn't a new thing, and it's happened a lot before, and there's some good and bad points to go along with it. If you want something slightly unique, we are going to be seeing within the next few weeks the Fury Pro, and that's the version that the vendors are allowed to go crazy with. That's the one that you're going to see the custom PCBs, you're going to see custom coolers going on there. I already know I've got a few coming, so you've not really got to worry. That is going to be the one that's going to be the custom one. And obviously we've not tested performance or anything like that, but it will be good to see the differences between the vendors and how they go about the cooling and all those types of things at a later date. But today it's all about the Fury X, and it's quite a big deal as well, because just to let you know, there really aren't very many of these in the UK at the moment, and I actually do have a very small window with this to be able to get all of my testing and everything done before it's then going to be going on to another media. So that's not, it's not ideal that we get such a short period of time with it, but that's just the way it's working with these. There's been a lot of drama around it as well, so I'm quite lucky to have it, and I am, yeah. So anyway, right. Essentially, Fury X, this is the new one. This is the Fiji core with the high bandwidth memory, the HBM. So what is HBM? Essentially what AMD have done is with DDR5 you would have had the memory chips around the outside of your PCB. The way that we're really used to. You look at your card, you take the cooler off, you can see the memory around the outside. It was DDR3, but that was donkeys years ago. And now we've been on DDR5 for such a long time. But essentially AMD have taken it a step further. And the HBM is pretty much where it's on the GPU die itself. So it's really, really close to the actual core, you know, the GPU core itself. And essentially by doing that, it minimises latency, because you've not got to move it about. It's right properly close. But also, it's a 3D memory stack design as well. There's 4 little blocks around the outside, and each one of those blocks is a gigabyte of HBM VRAM. Now I know, again, there has been a lot of chit chat about, oh my god, it's only 4 gigabyte. But to give you some numbers, essentially the memory speed has gone down, and so has the data rate with the HBM, but the bandwidth has gone up. And to give you a bit of an education about bandwidth, pretty much since Sandy Bridge, the DDR3 memory times have been starting to increase. But the actual what we'll call the megahertz, that's the bandwidth available. But the speed has it's increased, and the speed is the rate that it goes between. But the fact that the bandwidth has gone up has meant you've essentially got a much bigger pipe, so you can get a lot more through at once. And that's pretty much how HBM works. So just to give you some numbers so that we can talk about this and try and visualize it together. And I've got me little bits of paper so I can read it out to you. On the 290X, the GDDR5, the data rate would have been up to 5 gigabits a second. But with the, and that would have been running like 6,000 megahertz or something. But with the HBM, it's only 1 gigabits a second data rate at 500 megahertz. But the thing is, the bandwidth is where it goes crazy. You go from 320 gigabits a second up to 512 gigabits a second. So you can actually move a lot more through that pipe. It may be going through the pipe slightly slower, but there's so much more of it that really the bandwidth is a big deal, to be fair. Now, the way to kind of think about it is a lot of people going, oh, why is it not 8 gigabyte? We need 8 gigabyte. The 390X is 8 gigabyte. Well, if you've got a smaller pipe, then you need more video RAM at the top. Imagine it like a box, and you need a bigger box as storage because you can't get as much through that pipe. So you have a bigger store at the top to be able to store the stuff that you can't get through the pipe. So essentially what AMD have done is, yes, the box at the top might appear smaller, 4 gigabyte, but the pipe leading up to it, the actual the bandwidth is what the pipe stands for. The pipe that leads to it is massive. So you can get much more in and out of that pipe. So you don't need such a bigger, you know, you don't need as much VRAM at the top to store it's the frame buffer essentially. You don't need a bigger, the buffer is big at the top because you can get more in and out of that pipe at once. Or at least that's the theory behind it. But we do need to remember that HBM is in its infancy. This is HBM1. But also, you're on incredibly young drivers as well. So we're going to have to see how things pan out with this. But we're kind of breaking into a conclusion already. So it may seem that 500 megahertz memory is really slow, but it's such a new technology that it's something that you need to take with a pinch of salt and not treat it like the DDR5 that you used to. It's totally new. And things may progress in the future, but it's not necessarily, oh, it's only 4 gigabyte, oh, it's only 500 megahertz. That's the wrong way to think about it. It's pretty much like trying to compare apples and oranges. So we've got that. And then it's still on the 28 nanometer process. Stream processors is a big thing, really. The 290X had 2,816 stream processors, whereas the Fury X has 4,096. So to put it in teraflops, you're looking at 5.6 for the 290X. That goes up to 8.6 for the Fury X. So we've got some quite big numbers being chucked around there. I'm not going to bore you with any more bits and bobs within it. They're the basics of what's going on. I've tried to explain to you about HBM as well. If you want to have more details, and you can obviously click the link to go and have a look on the OC3D website, but that's kind of the layman's terms to get your head around it. Don't try and compare it with the 390X or the 290X as far as the actual video RAM buffer or whatever you want to call it is concerned, because the actual technology works completely different. And if you think about it, like I said, with the a box with a pipe, that's how it is. The pipe leading up to the 4 gigabyte of HBM is so much bigger that you don't necessarily need such a massive frame buffer, at least with games at the moment anyway. It's also going to be really interesting to see how the VRAM usage in games and stuff starts to evolve once, you know, we learn how to read this and monitor the usage, because obviously it's so different now that things are all going to get thrown up into the air. But price, I'm going to tell you this right at the beginning as well, before we start going through and looking at graphs and all of that type of stuff as well. And I've had a price from AMD and it's £509. 509 GBP. I've got a GBP price because I am in Blighty and I've not got a dollar price out of them yet. It's been difficult enough for me to get the GBP. So 509 does put it firmly between the 980 and the 980 Ti, because the 980 Ti is coming in around 550 And amazingly now you can pick vendor cards up of the 980 up for $450 now. So it kind of almost pretty much sits absolutely smack bang between the two. So enough of the chit chat. We need to have a look at the card itself, because if you've not seen this thing, then you've obviously been living underneath a rock. But we need to have a look at this thing. Then we'll look at some benchmarks and all that type of stuff. And then we're going to finish off with a really nice, meaty conclusion at the end. And you really will have to sit down and get nice and comfy on this one, because it isn't going to be necessarily like dead straightforward. There's a lot of explanations that you're going to need. So if you're seriously thinking about buying one of these, or you're just massively interested in tech, then go get your biscuits, go get your tea, go all that stuff, get nice and comfy, settle down, because the conclusion on this one could end up being a big one. Okay, so here's our first look at the card, and I've got it spread out like this so that you can see we've got the small card, and then we've got the hose, and then the radiator at the end. And there's a few things that we do need to cover. The length of the card itself, it is, I'll turn the ruler around the right way, 190 millimeters. Now, just to give you a kind of an idea, that's 20 millimeters off the end of an ITX motherboard. But obviously you've got the hose coming out the end, so you need to kind of think about that as well. The hose is quite pliable. It does bend quite well, so we've not got too many worries with that there. Power wise, so I can bring it up for you to have a look, we've got the two 8-pins here. Now these lights on here, I will do you a video to show you, but the lights, they flicker up and down. You've got 0-core technology. This one lights up green. I've actually never seen that light up green since I've had it. But these do flicker up and down to show you how much load is going on your graphics card, which is kind of a nice way to see how much power is being used. I've personally found that as soon as you open a game, they light up and they pretty much stay there if the game's under any load. It's nice to have this really nice slick back plate though. It's just really nice and plain, and I think I actually really like it. Now we've got this aluminium shroud all the way around the outside. It's proper, like, nice nickel plated. It's like a smoked nickel right the way around, but you can see it goes all the way around the card. It gives it a really nice quality heavy feel. Actually, for a small card, it does weigh an awful lot. Now we've got a dual BIOS switch here, but the ones that we've been shipped with, the BIOS on them's the same. I think one of the idea is that if you want to play around with the BIOS, you've got one that you can flash and mess around with, but then you've got a fixed locked one on the other setting. This does light up nice and red. It's actually nice that they're proudly showing off the Radeon logo again, because it seems like we've not really seen it for ages. Nvidia have obviously got GeForce down the side of theirs, but the fact that they've gone in with their red one is really nice. I think with the angle that we've got here, you can see that the nickel plated down the side here works really well with the matte look down the side with this the plastic portion. It's also quite strange to see that we've I'll say we've got like a printed or a sticker Radeon there across more of the chrome, but it's strange not to see a fan or any cooling on this at all. Obviously with the 295X2 we kind of got used to still having a fan on it, but this doesn't. Now I'm not meant to open this or do anything with this whatsoever, but I'm not that great when it comes to listening. Now I've only really popped the top off, so I shouldn't get in too many problems, but essentially I'm not going to take the rest of the card off, because that's the bit that they're properly fretting about, is it not getting put back together properly. But I did just want to show you this. Now the first and most surprising thing is that little logo there, the Cooler Master logo. Now the second most important thing, and it's the pointer thing that I do want to point out, is we've obviously got the input here and we've got the output there. Now as it comes out, you can see it does come into a copper pipe which comes around here. Now this is going into direct contact with, well, not direct contact, but it's on the back plate, and underneath that is where the MOSFETs are, so it's helping to cool the power delivery on the card. So rather than before, where we would have had a fan having to try and keep those bits cool, they've done this little nice copper pipe, And I think that is brilliant. That's probably my favourite point about this cooler, is that little copper pipe. It's brilliant. Now you can see that we've got a lot of material everywhere else. We've got the metal all around here, all around, so it's keeping other bits cool as well. But the fact that we've got a dedicated section to go around to try and help cool that is brilliant. One thing that I will say though is because there is so much metal, it does all warm up, and you know, these bits around here, for example, do get kind of warm. But I really like the inside look of that, and like I said, the Cooler Master side of it was quite surprising. Now, one thing I did look down here was for a fan header, and the fan that goes on the outside, it isn't like a normal fan header or anything like that. But if you wanted to, you could probably get your modding skills out and wire your fan in, or obviously if you did want to remove it all together, you know, get your little screwdrivers out and stuff. The clip is there. You can do if you want, and then obviously you could set it up with a motherboard on the motherboard. But that's your look inside, and I'm going to be good. I've broken the rules and I've broken the seal, but I'm not going to be a total rebel and rip the whole thing apart, even though I really, really want to. But they will properly go nuts if I go any further into it than this. But the cooler itself, I think it does look kind of nice. It's kind of cute, all hidden away inside. But it does just show you what was underneath. Right, so first things first. And I think these are the really important ones compared to where things were with the 290 launch as well. And that's power usage, and then we're going to move into temperatures as well, or temps and power use. Now temps, absolute top end I got out of mine after literally abusing it to within an inch of its life with 65 degrees. Now that's 65 degrees, and what we need to remember is it's the 120mm radiator, but it was really properly quiet. Like, you didn't know that fan on it was running. So 65 degrees. And that's pretty damn good, to be honest with you, for a single rad. If it was a bigger rad, it would have probably dropped exponentially. But what we do need to remember is the fact that it's got the 120mm rad on it means it's going to work in a larger portion of cases. If they were to put a 240mm rad on it, yes, it probably would have been 50 degrees or less, but the problem then would have been that you wouldn't have been able to, for argument's sake, it would be quite difficult to run two in Crossfire if you were going to buy them for Crossfire, and not many cases might, you know, have even a 240mm mount on the front. So going with the 120, 65 degrees, that is an absolute worst case scenario. And by that I mean, like I said, we abused it. We left it running 4K, just loops and loops for hours and hours. Most of the gaming results after about 60 minutes of use would have been around the 50 degree mark, which is absolutely kind of spot on, really. And the fact it stayed so quiet as well should speak volumes. The other thing to bear in mind is we left it on an auto fan profile, which was, to be honest with you, pretty much silent. So the 65 degrees, again, worst case scenario, if you wanted to set up a custom fan profile in CCC or Afterburner or the Asus GPU Tweak 2 and spin that fan up a little bit, the temperatures will plummet anyway because it's water cooled and it does respond really well to it. So the temperatures are much better than the 295X2. Obviously it's the 290X. Obviously, it's a completely different kettle of fish because we're talking about water cooling on this one. The fact that the MOSFETs are, as I've shown you, as the MOSFETs are cooled as well, that could also be adding to the heat in the loop, which may end up driving temperatures up. But it should add to longevity, long end. Then when we move into power usage, you're looking at about 467 watts. And that's with the way that we would do it to put in the graphs, which is Unigen, and we run Unigen at 1440p at 8 times, and we run that for all of the cards so that the graph then everything correlates. But just to let you know that if you were to put Tomb Raider on 4K, then you'd be looking at over 550 watts. So the 4K difference and really stressing the card out does make a great deal of difference. We could make it go up even more if we were to use like Fairmark and stuff, but we've kept this in the real world stuff. So our graphs are all comparable, less than 470 watts. If you run 4K in a game, then it absolutely ramps right the way up, and you'll end up getting over 550 watts with our test system, which is a 2011 rig. But the graphs are all comparable there. Something I do want to say as well is they do this frame rate targeting thing, which they say you can drive your power usage down. And the little lights on it, as I've shown you, it will only, you know, kind of use what it needs to power wise. Well, with the lights, essentially what I found is with every single test I've done, no matter what resolution I was at, it just maxes it out. So you have to use that frame rate targeting to be able to get it to knock itself back. The problem with that frame rate targeting is the lowest you can get is 55 FPS, which you might think to yourself, I'm not going to want to go lower than that. But when you look through some of the games in our graphs, there's not a lot of games, especially when you drive the resolution up, that you're really going to get much of a drop from. And I don't know about any of you lot out there, but when it really comes to it, I'm not sure I want to be capping my graphics card. I think I'm really going to want to be getting the best experience that I possibly can do with it. So I'm not 100% sure about this frame rate targeting malarkey. It's not going to magically, for argument's sake, if you set it to 90, you're not going to magically get 90 frames per second all the time. It's just that it won't let it go above 90 frames a second to try and save on power, rather than having on some games, for argument's sake, 200 frames a second and screaming off into the distance. The other problem with it as well is where you have to set it in CCC, it will affect every game. So you do need to kind of consider that, you know, like for argument's sake, if you're playing BF4, which obviously will run off into the distance for loads of frames per second, well, until you start driving the resolution up again, you might want to set it to a reasonable amount, but just make sure that's not going to affect your other games. The other thing to think about as well is if you're running a high hertz monitor, it's probably not going to be something that you're going to want to touch anyway. I think really the frame rate cap is only really going to be useful for people that are not using particularly stressful games and could end up either using now or are planning on purchasing a FreeSync monitor. I think that's really when it starts to come into its own, in my mind anyway. So then we can kind of move on to, I mean, what shall we start with? Let's start with some Tomb Raider, because Tomb Raider, it's an AMD game, and like I said, this one, it does stress the card out quite nicely. It makes it quite nice and power hungry, and it does sit pretty nicely in our graph. You can see that in the graph, you've got the 295X2 just above it. I think that should speak volumes really, because we do need to remember that's a twin core card. But the most important thing to be looking at here is 980s below it, other than the like the massive overclocked cards like the Hoff, but then the 980 Ti's above it. So it does sit itself quite nicely between the 980 and the 980 Ti. This also does mean that when you kind of chuck in the fact that we did the 390X for MSI, which was around and about just below, just above, depending on the game, a 980, it does mean that the Fury is clearly quicker than the 390X or 290X before you start going on and rambling on about all that kind of malarkey. But it does give you a nice boost on the 390X. It's definitely above the 980 and is harping on the heels of the 980 Ti. If we were then to move on to Grand Theft Auto 5, Grand Theft Auto 5, obviously this is a game that's really like stupidly popular at the moment. I'm fed up with hearing about it on the OC3D VIP chit chat and then on the forums and all that kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's all everyone's ever going on about, buying this car, doing this, you know, done that. But anyway, so when we smash it in here, it's pretty much the same kind of story. It's it does better than the 295 X2 with this, which is quite a good thing. One thing I will say with the 295 X2 result that we got on this, I tested this about 2 weeks ago, so that it was a more up-to-date one. We hadn't done GTA 5 with the 295 X2 before, so I got it in there, so it's in the results. So these are quite new drivers on the 295 X2 as well. So the fact that the Fury's above that should kind of give you a hint. I think AMD have spent a lot of time making sure that the GTA 5 stuff was good for launch, because it's going to be such a big pushing point. But again, when it comes to the green team, you can see there that you've got the 980 Matrix there, one side, and then you've got this stock 980 Ti on the other side. It's also a nice kind of mix, because obviously you can see all three resolutions there as well. Now, something AMD were absolutely harping on about was the fact that HBM was going to make massive leaps forward when it got to 4K, and that's because of with your frame buffer, the more settings and the more resolution that you come through, that's when you really start to use that frame buffer. And it's generally, I do mean generally, the higher the resolution, the more VRAM that you need for your card. Now we've got, this is our 4K graph. Now the 4K graph, you can see along the legend at the bottom, and don't worry, after the mistake I made with the 390X review, I'm not going to cut the legend off at the bottom. You can see that you've got the Fury X, the 390X, and then we chucked the MSI 980 Ti gaming in this, and we also chucked 980 Ti overclock in this as well, because the 980 Ti, the one thing that we do need to say is it does push overclocks out really easily, or you get like the MSI 980 Ti gaming, which comes out the box absolutely bob on, ready to rock off. So you can see in the graphs here that there isn't really like any massive like leaps off into the distance as I was hoping for. It's a mixed bag with this one, really. There's things like what I would call AMD titles like Alien Isolation, where the green team are clearly in front. You can also see, like with Grand Theft Auto 5 as well, there's a fairly big chunk forward. Now with Grand Theft Auto, what we decided on in the end, just to let you know our settings, we turn everything up to max, apart from the MSAA, which we leave on 0, because if you turn the MSAA up, it really does absolutely cripple the chance that you need to keep in mind that we need to run this on a big batch of cards going forward. So we need to be able to test this on, for argument's sake, the 380 and the 370, or cards like, for example, the 960 and the 970, as well as the Fury X, the Fury Pro. So we decided to keep the MSAA off, and it's the only game that we do it, because if we turn it all up, then you need cards, you know, normal cards with DDR5 with like 6 GB of VRAM to be able to run them properly, or they're absolutely crippled. So this is one of the few games where we leave it off, but everything else is turned up. And you can see here with the GTA 5 again, when you mix it all in, it doesn't do as well as we would possibly have hoped. And also with a lot of these tests that we've done, in AMD's own software, they were constantly saying that they were in front of NVIDIA. Now I'm using the latest driver, which is 15.5, and all of the other card results in this graph have just been done recently with normal off the website drivers, and all the results have been published beforehand. So it's not like we're trying to twist this or anything in any way. These are just the way that the graphs come out. Now it might sound like I'm being really negative about the points, the performance on this. I'm not. They've made some massive strides forward with this, and it's performing a lot better than I was expecting. But it's just not as good as they were saying it was going to be. That's the only point I'm trying to drive forward. It's still an absolute corker of a card with some serious kahunas at 4K, because 4K is tremendously demanding. Hopefully AMD's driver team will get their act together and start pumping out some non-beta complete drivers that will really start helping with games in the not too distant future. And I think that's really where the squidging points on these are going to start coming from. So yes, it is great. Might not look great compared to the other stuff, but if we were to chuck 980s in that graph as well, you would see that the Fury would be in front of those all the time. It's just the fact that it looks, you know, slightly skewed because the 980 Ti is in 4K. As far as I'm concerned, it is quicker. Okay then, on to the conclusion. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the award, and then we will explain why. And we're going to give it the Gold Award and the Innovation Award. Now they get the Innovation Award because they have tried to do something totally different. They've taken a step out into the unknown with HBM, and that's where that comes from. Obviously, they've kind of broken the mould and gone away from DDR5, which is where everybody else is and where they've been for all these years. And they've gone off and they've tried something different. They get the Gold Award and really the Gold Award was swung right at the last minute when I got the price of £509, and I think that sits it quite nicely between the 980 Ti and the GTX 980. The performance of the card is clearly pretty in everything above the 980. And I personally think that that's where AMD had aimed it from the start. Or at least, you know, like in the final kind of shades was the 980, because the 980 Ti was a bit of a surprise. And I think if it had come in at 500 quid and it was quicker than the 980, but then obviously quite close to the Titan, this card would have looked amazing. And it really would have done. The fact that NVIDIA kind of chucked that 980 Ti out kind of took the fizzle out of this a little bit right at the last minute, and I think there was some amazing marketing strategy going on there. But if you're an AMD boy and you've been looking for an AMD graphics card and you've wanted to be able to drive those high resolutions and all that type of stuff, then yes, this card is epic. It's just the actual form factor and size sort of side of it I think is a little bit confused, because it's a small form factor, which is obviously perfect for ITX rigs, like I've said, and front room and small stuff. But the fact that the hoses on it are so long, and they're a bit too long for the giant case that I use. So if you're in a real small case, the hose would have to be looped around all over the place. So in trying to please both worlds, the actual design side of it is a little bit confused, I think, and I think they've driven that forward to show how small that they can get stuff with that HBM. And I personally think that with this flagship one, yes, they could have had the HBM and all that type of stuff, but they could have just had a ridiculously clean PCB, maybe upgraded the power regs and stuff to make sure everything's really cool. But I think with the top end card like this, it should have been bigger. I personally do think it should have done. They do have the Nano coming, which is their like twice the performance per watt and stuff. And I think that is where the ITX side of it and the small form factor card, I think that's the one that should have been that itty bitty one where everything was properly shrunk down. But I think the Fury X should have been the big boy, do you know what I mean? And I think they kind of missed a bit of a trick there in trying to please too many people with one product. And I think a lot of people would kind of go against the real small form factor side of it because it's going to look a bit odd in a big high-end system. And like I said, in a small system, the hoses are too long. Way too long, to the point where they're even a bit too long in a big case. So it's a bit of a mixed bag with that, and I'm not 100% sure where they were going to be going with it. So to recap, performance, it is brilliant. Compared to the 390X or the 290X, it's a massive leap forward. Compared to the 980, it's a massive leap forward. It's when you mix that 980 Ti in, it kind of takes the fizzle out of it because it's not quite as good as that. Despite, you know, all the kind of stuff that's been going around online and, you know, their own press decks and stuff, it's just not quite there. It's definitely harping on the heels, and it's the most important thing I think to take out of this is it's probably given NVIDIA quite a scare as well. But I don't want to mention NVIDIA too much because this is a big step in the right direction for AMD. It's the first time that we've properly seen them being, you know, like really competitive in a long while, and it's so nice to see. We just need them to take this momentum now and keep driving forward. Obviously, they're not going to pull a graphics card out of their rear end in a few months, but something from an end user point of view and something that I'm continuously seeing on the forums all the time, So this is me talking really nicely to AMD. Can you please, don't know whether you need to hire more people, whether you need to change the people or get some, someone in. You need to sort the drivers out. The drivers, I know we've just had the 15.6 just come out. We've not had one before then for months. I don't know whether the driver people were working on the Fury stuff or something, but we need to kind of get to the point where we've got regular, not beta drivers out. We need to get regular full drivers out because it's something that you're properly losing on at the moment, and it's something that does need addressing in a big way. So enough of the rant. Please take heed. Nice one, thank you, please. Performance is absolutely bob on. Cooling was better than I expected. The power draw was much better than I expected. Everything, nice green ticks going down your homework sheet. There's a couple of little question marks there, which I'm hoping will get fixed. If one thing I will say though is if you're liking the performance on this and you do want the AMD but you are a bit weary about that small PCB or the water cooling or the massive hose, then the Fury Pro could be the one that you're going to want to look at in a few weeks time, because I've already seen some mock-ups and some renders and some stuff coming through what the vendors have got coming, and it could be really, really exciting times. I'm personally going to say that if you're a high-end, proper hardcore enthusiast, and you want that full-fledged card, you like to have a bit of meat in your rig, it looks like, you can actually see where you've kind of spent your money, then I think the Fury Pro is probably going to be the card most of you are going to want to pick up. But that's it. We've done the Fury X review. It was a mixed bag, and I'm hoping that I explained enough points to you along the way that you know where I'm coming from and you don't think I'm trying to bash it. I really wanted AMD to do really well on this, and I think they've pretty much come up to what the absolute best that they possibly could have done with this. It does also though mean exciting times ahead, that they've stepped off. They're the first ones to drive off with this pioneering new HBM, so they're going to be in front when it comes to them doing HBM2 with the, if there's an X range of graphics cards and stuff. So it could be really exciting times ahead. So I'm hoping that I got enough of a positive spin into that, because there were a lot of points that I wanted to put into it. I didn't want to come across too negatively. So hopefully I found the balance, and I've just found myself on the camera on the side. But anyway, so thank you very much for watching the video. I'm sorry it was so long, but I did want to raise all these points. That's generally what I do. If you want to watch the short videos, then you can go and watch somebody else's. But for now at least, it's Tiny Tom Logan with the Gold Award winning and Innovation Award winning AMD Fury X review out. Ding!